So by the 17th century, IOUs started being very popular and they were used in many countries. Now the problem is that these countries started printing way too many of them. And that obviously causes issues between competing countries that use each other's currencies, but also within the country itself, right? So it was apparent that we needed to back up our currency. And this is where the gold standard came in, and started being used in 1879 by the US. And what the gold standard is basically a system that backs up its currency by gold. So basically we can say that this piece of paper here is worth X amount of gold. So the US adopted the system, and at that time you could exchange 1 ounce of gold for $20.67. So if you went to the government and you gave them an ounce of gold, you would get that. And if you gave them $20.67, you would get back an ounce of gold. That was the deal that you had with the government. And what this did is really, it limited governments and banks' excessive use of paper currency. So they couldn't just print as much as they wanted, right? Because this causes huge inflations and other things we'll talk about, because the currency has to be backed up by gold, so they can't print as much as they want. And this is the system that was adopted since that period. There was issues, and this is the golden age. It's that time where your currency was backed up by gold. You could go to the bank or your government and say, give me back my gold, and you get back your gold. So if you look at a paper bill, here's a $10 bill here, and you can see here it says this certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of United States of America. You have a $10 in gold coin, and it says here payable to the bearer on demand. So you go with this $10 bill, they'll give you your actual gold coin, because this piece of paper here is worthless. It's actually nothing. The actual money is the gold. So you gotta go back in time, because right now when I tell you a $10, you're like $10 is $10. But back then people were like, this piece of paper is worthless. The gold is what's valuable. The gold is the money, but the piece of paper is nothing. It's just an IOU. It's just a contract. It's like if I have a contract that says you owe me $10,000. The contract itself is nothing. It's the $10,000 that are worth something, but the contract guarantees that you're going to give it to me. It's the same thing. People didn't see paper money as money. It was just something that would give them access to their gold. It's an IOU, right? So that was the gold standard. So when you hear about that, it's just basically the system where your currency is backed up by gold. And then, all the countries adopted that system at this time. So at this point, we're under the gold standard, but not for too long, right? So we're under the gold standard as of 1879, but then World War I happens, right? In 1914, okay? And at this time, we needed way more cash to spend than we had in actual gold, right? So the government at that time just printed way more money than it actually had. After the war, it came back and got back being on the gold standard. But then again, with the Great Depression in 1929, all the governments needed to print way more money to stimulate the economy, right? Because the more money there is in the economy, the more cash people have, the more they spend, right? And instead of hoarding their money, they're going to spend it, because they know there's more of it. It's going to get devalued. If there's more of something, it's worth less. So people are going to spend it because, there's way more of it. So, but when you print so much cash, then you can't really back it up. So in the 1930s, the UK and the US stopped redeeming cash. And that was under Roosevelt for gold coins, right? Main reason, not enough gold to back the amount of currency they wanted, because they wanted to increase the money supply. So this is like, they shouldn't do this, but it was important for the economy for them to have a bigger money supply. And In the Great Depression, that's really what got people out of that depression. It's more money supply, but they couldn't do that with the gold, the current gold reserve that they had. Now, this is a big subject and everybody has their opinion on it. I truly don't know if it was the right thing to do or not, but that's what happened. So what took place at that time is you had fiat currency, right? And this is the form of currency we know now, okay? Fiat currency is what you have in your pocket. It's a term to describe currency that is used because of government's order, right? So this is the executive order that came in 1933. I have it here. Let me just open it up, right? So it came out, says under executive order of the president in 1933, all persons are required to deliver on or before May 1st all gold coins. So they said, give us all the coins and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank, so any of the branches of banks, and get this fiat currency. So now you're going to use that. It's not backed up, but we're telling you to use it. It's worth something because we said it's worth something, okay? And that's what happened. People started using that. So then you would get a coin, or sorry, a bill like this one. And when you look at this one here, you see Federal Reserve note, and you see here it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. $1. Doesn't say anything like the other bill where it's backed up by something. So it's like they kind of severed the link between the IOU and the gold, and they're like, hey, forget about the gold. Okay? Use this and you can pay with it. Now, you couldn't just do that, right? Because if every country had their currency and they could just print as much of it as they wanted, well, that causes a problem, right? Because let's say the US has X amount of currency and China has X amount of currency. Well, China wants to have its currency, they want to devalue their currency, right? They want it to be worth less. Why? Because they want to increase their exports. They want Americans to buy from China, right? And Americans are going to buy from China if their dollar is worth a lot in China. So the Chinese government wants their yuan, their currency, their local currency, to be devalued as much, to be worth the least possible compared to the US. So they'll print as much as they can. And that's a problem because then the US are not gonna export at all because a dollar is gonna be too expensive for the Chinese. So their exports are gonna decrease. So there's a problem. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants the other country to devalue its currency too much, right? So they came along and they're like, okay, we're gonna sign this agreement, okay? We'll call it the Bretton Woods. And the reason for that is, again, because everybody had the fear that other countries would just devalue their currency. So everybody met 1944, 44 countries, and they met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. So that's why they call it that. And they said, okay, well, instead of each country backing up its currency by gold, which we can't do because there's not enough gold really, and sometimes this country is not going to have enough or whatnot. You know what we're going to do? The US right now, they have the most amount of gold. I think by that time, the US had like half the gold or something. So the US has the most amount of gold. What we're going to do is we're going to link our currencies to the US dollar, okay? So basically, instead of backing up our currency with gold, we'll back it up by US dollars. And the US is going to back up its dollar by gold. So then we're linked in a way, but instead of having to keep the gold in our vaults, we can just keep US dollars. And the US dollar is linked because at this time, you know, there's a lot of trades, international trades, and you're buying something from the US is buying something from you. You have a lot of US dollars. You don't need to convert that to gold to back up your currency. You can just keep that currency because you know that that currency is backed up by gold. And that was the agreement. So no countries needed to back up its currency with gold. The US would back it up with gold, and you guys can have the US dollar in your reserves. Simultaneously, there was the creation of the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund. And the IMF its role is to lend money to countries that are in need. So in the same way that you have central banks that would lend to branches money because they have a lot of people who want to take out their money simultaneously, you had the IMF that would help countries if they require money for that period of time. There was also the creation of the World Bank, which the purpose of that was to help underdeveloped countries to grow. So we stayed under this new system for a while, but again, you'll see it didn't last long, and we'll see that in the next lecture.